The blood moon hung low over the ruined cathedral of Ashenfell, casting crimson shadows across shattered stone and forgotten graves. The air tasted of iron and regret, thick with fog that moved like the breath of dying gods. In the distance, the howl of something ancient echoed through skeletal trees. But here, in this forsaken place where vows were once spoken and broken, there was only silence. And then the sound of metal scraping stone. She emerged from the darkness like a phantom summoned by memory itself. Her silhouette cut through the falling ash, each particle catching the moonlight like dying stars. The biomechanical prosthetic where her left leg should have been gleamed with runic inscriptions that pulsed with a sickly violet light, each step a deliberate declaration of survival against impossible odds. The prosthetic was a masterwork of forbidden alchemy and dark engineering, sleek obsidian metal interwoven with bone-white runes that seemed to drink the shadows around them, powered by something that was neither wholly magical nor entirely mechanical, but a grotesque marriage of both.
Her wings, magnificent, terrible things, spread partially behind her, torn membranes revealing the skeletal framework beneath, yet still capable of blotting out the stars. They were not the pristine wings of angels or the leathery appendages of common bat-like creatures, but something far more primal. Vast expanses of translucent membrane stretched between elongated finger bones, each joint articulated with predatory grace, the edges ragged from battles she'd survived but never truly recovered from. Celine Bloodmorrow had many names across many centuries: the Crimson Widow, the Broken Valkyrie, the Last Bride of the Fallen House, but tonight she wore none of these titles. Tonight, she was simply a woman, if such a word could still apply to what she had become, searching for the face of the man who had damned her to this existence. Her pale skin, ghostly in the moonlight, bore the faint tracery of veins like cracks in porcelain, a side effect of the incomplete transformation that had left her suspended between mortality and true vampiric immortality. Her eyes, those burning crimson orbs that could see through flesh to the secrets men carried in their hearts, swept across the ruins with a mixture of fury and something far more dangerous: hope.
The Gothic armor she wore had once been magnificent, forged by the master smiths of the Nocturne dynasty before their fall. Now it hung torn and weathered on her frame, the breastplate cracked down the center from a wound that should have killed her, the pauldrons bent from impacts that would have shattered lesser beings. Yet she wore it still, not as protection, but as a shroud, a reminder of what she had been before the night everything changed. Her long white hair, tangled and wild, moved in a wind that existed only for her, responding to the tumult of emotions she could barely contain. Strands fell across her face, partially obscuring features that were both beautiful and terrible. High cheekbones that could have graced the face of a noblewoman, lips that had forgotten how to smile but remembered all too well how to curse. And those fangs, just visible when she breathed, slightly longer than they should be, catching the light like promises of violence. She was searching for him, and she had found him.
Marcus Thorne stood 50 paces away, his back to a crumbling pillar, his hand instinctively moving toward the silver dagger at his belt before freezing. He was older now. 15 years had carved lines into his face that no amount of comfortable living could erase. His once dark hair was shot through with gray at the temples, and his eyes, those same storm-gray eyes that had once looked at her with something resembling love, now reflected only shock and a fear so profound it bordered on religious terror. He was dressed in the practical garb of a monster hunter, leather reinforced with steel plates, blessed silver woven into the seams, protection against the very things he had spent the last decade and a half destroying. His hands, calloused and scarred, trembled slightly as recognition dawned across his features like a slow-burning horror. "Celine," he breathed, the name escaping his lips like a prayer to a god he no longer believed in. You remember. Her voice cut through the space between them, not loud, but carrying the weight of every year, every night, every moment she had spent becoming this thing that stood before him. It was a voice that had screamed itself hoarse in agony, that had whispered promises in the dark, that had begged for death and been denied even that mercy. You remember. I wasn't certain you would. 15 years is a long time for humans. Your memories are so fragile, so conveniently selective.
She took a step forward, the biomechanical leg hissing softly as hydraulics and dark magic worked in concert to support her weight. The runes flared brighter with each movement, feeding on her anger, her pain, the vast well of emotion she had dammed up behind walls of survival and vengeance. Marcus didn't move, couldn't move. His mind was racing backward through time, through the carefully constructed narrative he had built to explain away the greatest sin of his life. 15 years earlier, the night everything changed. The village of Thornhaven had been dying, not from plague or famine, but from something far worse. A creeping despair that turned the fertile fields to ash and made children weep in their sleep. The local lord, desperate and fearful, had summoned what he called specialists, men and women who dealt in the currency of monsters and miracles. Marcus had been young then, barely 23, part of a guild that hunted things that went bump in the night. He had come to Thornhaven with 3 others, veteran hunters who had seen horrors that would break normal minds, who had survived encounters with werewolves, ghouls, revenants, and darker things still. The source of the village's curse had been traced to the old Bloodmurrow estate, a gothic monstrosity perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. Once home to a noble family of considerable power, it had fallen into shadow and rumor after a scandal involving forbidden practices and deals with entities best left unnamed. Only one member of the family remained, Celine Bloodmurrow, the youngest daughter, barely 19 years old. Marcus remembered the night they broke down the doors of the estate, holy water and blessed silver at the ready, expecting to find some ancient horror, some vampire lord gorged on the blood of innocents. Instead, they found her. She had been in the grand library, surrounded by books and scrolls, her hands stained with ink and blood from where she had cut herself in desperation, attempting to reverse something her family had begun but never finished. She was human then, completely, vulnerably human, but marked by the curse that ran through her bloodline, a genetic legacy that would transform her on her 21st birthday into something inhuman unless the ritual was completed or undone. Marcus's companions had wanted to kill her immediately. Mercy before manifestation, they called it. Better to end a life while it was still human than allow the transformation to complete. But Marcus had looked into her eyes, had seen not a monster, but a terrified young woman who had done nothing to deserve the curse of her birth, and he had made a choice that would echo through the years like a tolling bell. He had convinced them to give him 1 week to find a cure, a counterspell, something, anything that might save her without taking her life. Those 7 days had been the most intense of Marcus's young life. He and Celine had worked tirelessly, poring over ancient texts, consulting with hedge witches and wandering scholars, following leads that ranged from promising to absurd. They barely slept, sustained by desperation and increasingly by something else, a connection that formed in the crucible of shared purpose. She was brilliant, he discovered. Her family had educated her extensively, and her mind was a weapon as sharp as any blade. She had a gift for languages, for deciphering the obtuse metaphors and hidden meanings in ancient grimoires. More than that, she had courage. She stared directly at the horror awaiting her without flinching, determined to fight until her last moment of humanity. On the 4th night, working by candlelight in the library that had become their sanctuary, she had looked up from a particularly dense Latin text and caught him staring at her. "What is it?" she had asked,
a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. Nothing, he had lied, just thinking about the next lead. But it wasn't nothing. Somewhere in those 4 days, Marcus Thorne had done the most foolish thing a hunter could do. He had begun to see his quarry as a person, and more than that, as someone he could imagine a future with. On the 5th night, they had found it, a ritual of binding, ancient and dangerous, but potentially capable of halting the transformation indefinitely. There was a catch, of course. There was always a catch. The ritual required the willing participation of someone outside the bloodline, someone who would share the burden of the curse, anchor Selene to her humanity through a bond that was described in the archaic text as the joining of essences, the mingling of fates, the eternal covenant between souls. "It's a mating bond," Selene had said quietly, her finger tracing the illuminated script. "A permanent magical connection between two individuals. It's intimate. More than marriage, more than any vow. It would tie your life force to mine. Use your humanity as an anchor to prevent my transformation." "What are the risks?" Marcus had asked, though he already knew his answer. "To you, unknown. The text is unclear. You might feel nothing, or you might carry a piece of the curse yourself. It might shorten your life or extend it. Magic this old, this powerful, it's unpredictable." She had looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw fear in her eyes, but also something else. "You don't have to do this. You've already done more than anyone could ask. If we can't find another way, I've accepted." "I'll do it," he had interrupted. "Marcus, I'll do it," he repeated, with more certainty than he had felt about anything in his life. "We'll perform the ritual. We'll save you." What he didn't say, what he barely admitted to himself, was that in 5 days he had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Selene Bloodmorrow, and he would have walked through fire, faced down elder demons, challenged death itself to protect her. The ritual took place on the 6th night, in the estate's private chapel, a place long abandoned by any gods that might have once taken notice. They had prepared meticulously, gathering the required components: moonflower petals that only bloomed in graveyards, the preserved heart of a dove that had died of natural causes, 13 black candles blessed by 13 different faiths, and blood, both hers and his, mixed in a chalice of purest silver. The words of the ritual were in a language older than Latin, older than Greek, possibly older than any human tongue. Selene spoke them haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate with the stones of the building itself. Marcus felt it the moment the bond took hold, a sensation like lightning running through his veins, like his heart suddenly beating in sync with another. The air between them became visible, shimmering with threads of light that only they could see, weaving back and forth, creating a lattice of connection that was both beautiful and terrifying. When the ritual reached its crescendo, when the power peaked and demanded its price, they had come together not just physically but spiritually, their essences intertwining in ways that transcended flesh. It was communion and consummation, prayer and promise, an act that left them both fundamentally changed. For one perfect moment, Marcus had felt Selene's soul as clearly as his own, her fears, her hopes, her strength, and beneath it all, a warmth that he recognized as an emotion that mirrored what he felt for her. The ritual had worked. The transformation halted, held at bay by the power of their bond. Selene remained human, anchored to mortality by the connection they had forged. For 3 days, it had been perfect. Then Marcus's companions had discovered what he had done. They had confronted him in the courtyard of the estate, 3 hardened hunters with faces like judgment carved in stone. Jakob, the leader, had been particularly furious. "Do you understand what you've done, boy?" Jakob had snarled, his hand on the pommel of his blessed sword. "You've bound yourself to a creature of darkness.
The ritual might have delayed her transformation, but you've only postponed the inevitable. The curse doesn't disappear, it waits. And when it comes, and it will come, she'll drag you down with her. You don't know that, Marcus had argued, though doubt was already a worm in his mind. The text said, "The texts were written by vampires and their thralls." This from Mira, the group's scholar, her eyes sad but unyielding. Every word designed to ensnare fools like you. The bond won't save her, Marcus. It will damn you both. We can manage it. We'll find a way to make it permanent. I'll stay with her. You'll what? Spend your life shackled to a monster? Watch as the curse slowly consumes her despite your bond? And what happens when she finally turns, when the hunger takes her and she needs blood to survive? Will you volunteer to be her first victim? Or will you watch as she slaughters innocents to sustain her unnatural life?
The arguments had continued for hours, wearing down his resolve like water on stone. They had presented evidence, accounts of similar rituals that had failed, stories of hunters who had tried to save individuals cursed with vampirism, only to become victims themselves, or worse, accomplices to their atrocities. And slowly, insidiously, fear had begun to replace love in Marcus's heart. What if they were right? What if he had condemned Celine to a slower, more agonizing fate? What if the bond itself was a trap, a mechanism by which the curse would spread to him and through him to others? On the 8th day, while Celine slept, he had made his decision. He had left. No goodbye, no explanation. He simply gathered his things in the gray light before dawn and walked away from the Bloodmarrow estate, from his companions who nodded in grim approval, from the bond he had forged, and from the woman he loved. He told himself it was mercy. He told himself he was protecting her and the world from the disaster that was surely coming. He told himself many things in the years that followed, building a fortress of justifications around the truth he couldn't bear to face. He had been a coward.
You left me, Celine said now, her voice cutting through the memory like a blade. She took another step forward, and Marcus could see the tears tracking down her cheeks, mixing with the falling ash. I woke up, and you were gone. The bond was there, screaming in my chest that you were getting farther away, but you were gone. And I waited. Gods, Marcus, I waited. Days, weeks, months. I kept thinking you would come back, that there was some explanation, that the man who had held me, who had sworn with his blood and soul to stand with me, wouldn't simply abandon me like I was nothing. Celine, Marcus started, but she raised a hand, and the gesture, so simple, carried such weight that he fell silent. But you never came back, she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more devastating than any shout. And the bond that was supposed to save me, it became my torture. I could feel you, Marcus, always, every day. The connection you created with that ritual, it didn't disappear just because you ran away. I felt you living your life, felt you laughing, loving, fighting, surviving. While I was trapped in that estate, feeling my humanity slip away piece by piece. She gestured to herself with a sweep of her hand that encompassed her pale skin, her crimson eyes, her fangs, her wings. The bond held for 2 years. 2 years of agony as the curse pressed against it, probing for weaknesses, finding them in every moment of loneliness. Every night I spent alone wondering why I wasn't enough to make you stay. And when the bond finally broke, and oh, Marcus, when it broke, it was like dying and being reborn in the same instant. The transformation took me all at once. Marcus watched as she relived the memory, saw the phantom pain cross her face. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to explain, but what explanation could suffice? What defense could stand against the simple fact of his abandonment? The transformation was supposed to take place gradually, Celine continued, her wings twitching with agitation, sending small clouds of ash swirling. Over the course of months, giving the body time to adapt. But because of the bond, because of the artificial delay, when it finally happened, it was instantaneous and catastrophic. My body tried to change everything at once. Do you know what that's like? Having your bones reshape, your organs reconstruct themselves, your very blood rewrite its nature, all in the span of a single night? She lifted her arms, and Marcus saw the fine scars that covered them like a roadmap of suffering. My bones shattered and reformed. My heart stopped and restarted. I went blind, deaf, lost every sense and had them return twisted, heightened, wrong. And through it all, I could feel you, still alive, still whole, living your life as if I had never existed. I thought I was protecting you, Marcus said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. They told me the bond would fail, that you would turn regardless, that I was only prolonging your suffering. You thought it was easier to run than to stay and face the consequences of your choice, Celine interrupted, and there was no anger in her voice now, only a tired sadness that cut deeper than rage ever could. You thought you could forge a bond that would tether our very souls together and then simply walk away without ramifications? You thought you could play with powers beyond your understanding and escape unscathed? You were wrong, Marcus, about all of it.
She gestured to the biomechanical leg, the runes flaring brighter. When the transformation took me, my body was already weakened from 2 years of fighting the curse. Not everything survived the change. My left leg didn't make it. The bones disintegrated, the flesh necrotized. I should have died. Any normal person would have died. But vampires are stubborn creatures, Marcus. We don't die easily. We persist, even when death would be a mercy. Marcus felt sick. The weight of what he had done was crushing, a physical pressure on his chest that made it hard to breathe. Celine, I'm sorry. I'm so... Sorry? The word was a lash. You're sorry? Do you think that word has the power to undo what you did? To give me back my humanity? My leg? The 15 years I spent learning to be a monster instead of learning to be a woman? Her wings spread fully now, vast and terrible, blotting out the blood moon, casting them both in shadow. I spent 5 years trapped in that estate, unable to leave because I didn't know how to control this. She gestured to herself, to the wings, the fangs, the eyes that glowed with inhuman light, this thing I had become. 5 years teaching myself to walk again with one leg, learning to fly with torn wings, figuring out how to feed without killing, because even as a monster, I refused to become what my family had been. She stepped closer, and Marcus could smell the strange perfume of her, old blood and newer death, dust and flowers, something that was neither living nor dead, but suspended between. And do you know what kept me going through all of it? Do you know what thoughts sustained me through the worst nights when the hunger was so intense I wanted to rip my own throat out just to end it? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. The thought that someday I would find you, she said, her face inches from his now, her crimson eyes boring into his soul, that I would stand before you and ask the question that has haunted me every moment since you left. Why?
The question hung in the air between them, more powerful than any spell, heavier than any curse. Marcus Thorne, who had faced down horrors that would drive normal men mad, who had stared into the abyss and fought things that crawled out of it, found himself unable to answer. Because the truth was complex and simple simultaneously. He had been afraid of the bond, afraid of the responsibility it represented, afraid of loving something that might destroy him, afraid of being destroyed by that love. He had been young and foolish, and he had listened to men who claimed to know better, and he had made a choice that had seemed rational in the moment, but had proven to be the greatest mistake of his life. I was a coward, he said finally, the words tasting like ash. They told me you would turn regardless, that the bond was a trap, that I was endangering myself and everyone around me. And I believed them because it was easier than staying and fighting for you, for us. I convinced myself I was being noble, making a sacrifice, protecting the greater good. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what we had created. Scared of the bond. Scared of loving you as much as I did. You loved me? Celine's voice was barely a whisper. With everything I had, Marcus admitted, and the confession felt like bleeding out a poison he'd carried for 15 years. You were brilliant and brave and kind, and in those 7 days you became my entire world. And that terrified me. So I ran, and I've been running ever since.
Celine stood very still for a long moment, processing his words. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, some of the fury drained away, replaced by something more vulnerable. The bond is still there, you know, broken, damaged, but not gone. I can feel you even now, your fear, your regret, your guilt. It's how I found you. I have followed that connection across half the world, through cities and wilderness, tracking the one person in all of existence who my soul recognizes, even after all these years. Marcus felt it then, consciously reaching for the sensation he had spent 15 years trying to ignore. A pull, a warmth, a presence that sat behind his heart like a second heartbeat. The bond. It had never truly broken, only wounded, scarred, but still there. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and he was proud that his voice didn't shake. "Revenge? My death? Name it. After what I did, you're entitled to whatever justice you demand." Celine laughed, but it was a broken sound, full of pain and irony. Justice? What justice could possibly suffice? Should I kill you? That won't give me back my humanity. Should I turn you? Make you into what I am, so you understand what you condemned me to? Would that balance the scales? She turned away from him, her shoulders slumping, the fierce intensity that had animated her draining away to reveal the exhaustion beneath. I spent years imagining this confrontation, years planning what I would say, what I would do. I imagined myself strong, fierce, unbreakable. I would make you pay. I would make you suffer. I would... She stopped, and Marcus saw her wings fold in tight against her back, a gesture that was almost protective. When she spoke again, her voice was small, the voice of the 19-year-old girl he had abandoned. But now that I'm here, now that I'm standing in front of you, all I feel is tired. So incredibly tired. Marcus took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough to touch her. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away or strike him down, he reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. The armor was cold beneath his palm, but beneath it he could feel the warmth of her, the undeniable presence of the woman he had loved. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that not a day has passed in the last 15 years that I haven't thought about you. Not a single day that I haven't regretted leaving. I tried to move on, tried to convince myself I did the right thing, but the bond wouldn't let me forget. Every hunt, every monster I faced, I saw your face. Every person I saved, I wondered if I could have saved you, if I'd just been brave enough to stay." Celine didn't pull away from his touch, but she didn't lean into it either. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked. "It's not the transformation. It's not the pain or the hunger or even the leg. It's the loneliness, Marcus. Vampires live for centuries. Did you know that? Barring violence, I could exist for 500 years, 1,000, and I will spend all that time alone because the only person I ever bonded with, the only person my soul has ever recognized as its other half, walked away and never looked back. I'm looking back now," Marcus said, and he was surprised to feel tears on his own cheeks. "I'm looking at you, Celine. I see you. I see what I did, and if you'll let me, I want to try to make it right. I know I can't undo the past. I can't give you back what you lost, but I'm here now. I'm not running anymore." She turned to face him, and the look in her crimson eyes was so complex, so layered with emotion, that he couldn't begin to parse it all. Hope and fear, anger and longing,
pain and something that might have been the ghost of love warring within her. "What does that mean?" she asked. "What does making it right look like? You have a life, Marcus. I've watched you from the shadows. You have friends, a reputation, a purpose. What could you possibly offer me that would change anything?" "Everything," he said simply. "I offer you everything I am and everything I have. My time, my life, my loyalty, whatever you need. If you want revenge, take it. If you want me to walk away and never darken your existence again, I will. If you want me to stay, to try to repair what I broke, I'll spend the rest of my days attempting to earn back even a fraction of your trust." Celine stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her wrestling with herself, the part of her that wanted to believe, warring with the part that had been hurt too deeply to trust. Finally she spoke, and her words were careful, measured. "The bond can be repaired," she said. "I've spent years researching, studying the magic that created it. It's damaged, but not beyond restoration. If we both willed it, if we performed the ritual again, properly this time, it could be made whole. The texts suggest that a restored bond might even help balance what I've become, your humanity anchoring my darkness, creating an equilibrium that would make existence bearable." "Then let's do it," Marcus said, without hesitation. "You don't understand what you're agreeing to," Celine warned. "A restored bond would be permanent, Marcus. Truly permanent. Our lives would be intertwined until one of us died, and given my nature, that means you would be tied to me for the rest of your natural life. You would feel what I feel, hunger when I hunger, know my pain as intimately as your own. There would be no walking away, no change in your mind. Are you truly prepared for that?" He thought about the 15 years he had spent hollow, going through the motions of living while a part of him remained forever in that estate with a woman he had abandoned. He thought about the countless nights he had woken reaching for someone who wasn't there, feeling the echo of a bond he had tried and failed to sever. He thought about the person he had been with Celine, purposeful, passionate, whole, and the shadow of that person he had become in her absence. "I've been tied to you since the moment we first performed the ritual," he said. "Walking away didn't change that. It only made us both suffer needlessly. If you'll have me, if you can find it in yourself to give me another chance, I'm ready to commit. Completely. No reservations, no fear. I'll be what I should have been 15 years ago. Your mate, your rancor, your partner. In whatever form you need." Something shifted in Celine's expression, the hard edges softening slightly. She reached up with one pale hand and touched his face, her fingers cold against his skin, her touch tentative, as if she feared he might vanish if she pressed too hard. "I hate you," she said softly, but there was no venom in it. "I hate you for leaving. I hate you for making me love you and then disappearing. I hate you for coming back and making me hope again, when hope is the most dangerous thing a creature like me can feel." "I know," Marcus said, covering her hand with his own. "But I never stopped loving you," she continued, and her voice broke on the words. "Despite everything, despite the pain and the anger and the years of loneliness. The bond might have cracked, but what I felt for you didn't. It survived the transformation, survived the centuries of darkness that are now my birthright. And I don't know if that makes me strong or pathetic. It makes you human. More human than most people I've met who were born that way." Celine laughed, and this time it was a real laugh, startled and genuine. "I'm a vampire with a missing leg, torn wings, and an appetite for blood. I think human might be a stretch. You're the woman who fought her curse for years rather than give in to it, who learned to control herself rather than become a mindless killer, who crossed the world to confront the person who hurt her instead of simply taking revenge. That's more humanity than most people show in their entire lives." She studied him for a long moment, her crimson eyes searching his face for any sign of deception or false comfort. Whatever she found there, it must have satisfied her.
because she nodded slowly. If we do this, if we repair the bond, you need to understand what my life is. I don't live in estates anymore. I can't stay in one place too long. People notice when someone doesn't age, doesn't eat normal food, only appears at night. I move between the shadows of the world, helping where I can, feeding on those who won't be missed. Criminals, abusers, the cruel, and the wicked. I've made it my mission to be the monster that monsters fear. Can you live with that? Can you be partner to a creature who sustains herself on blood?
Marcus considered this. His entire life had been built around hunting monsters, protecting innocents from the darkness. Could he stand beside something that embodied that darkness, even if it wielded its nature as a weapon for good? Could he reconcile the creed he had lived by with the reality of loving someone who existed outside the boundaries of that creed? I've spent 15 years hunting monsters, he said slowly, and in that time I've learned something important. The most monstrous acts I've witnessed weren't done by vampires or werewolves or demons, they were done by humans. People who chose cruelty despite having every opportunity to choose kindness. If you use what you are to stop people like that, then you're not the monster, Celine. You're the answer to them. Pretty words, she said, but he could hear the hope creeping into her voice. Can you stand behind them when you wake up next to me and remember what I am? When you feel the hunger through the bond? When you have to watch me feed? I stood beside you once, before I knew what fear would make me do, Marcus said. Let me stand beside you again, knowing what I know now, and I'll show you that I can be what I should have been the first time. Not perfect, not fearless, but present, committed. Yours. Celine was quiet for a long time, and Marcus watched emotions play across her face like clouds across the moon. Finally, she stepped back, her wings spreading slightly. The ritual requires preparation, she said, and there was a new energy in her voice, something that sounded almost like excitement. We'll need to gather components, find a suitable location, wait for the proper lunar phase. It could take weeks. Then we have weeks. Where do we start?
And so began the strangest partnership Marcus Thorne had ever known. They left the ruined Cathedral of Ashenfell together, Celine leading them through paths only she could see, her vampiric senses guiding them through the night. Marcus followed, and with each step he felt the broken bond between them flickering, trying to remember what it had been. They traveled to the city of Ravenholm first, a place of gray stone and darker reputation, where practitioners of the old arts gathered to trade knowledge and components. Celine knew the city well. She had contacts in its shadow markets, favors owed, and debts to collect. Marcus watched her move through this world with a grace that spoke of years of practice. She had adapted to her condition in ways he couldn't have imagined, turning her curse into a tool, her isolation into strength. The biomechanical leg, which he had initially seen as a disability, proved to be an advantage. The runic enhancements gave her speed and power beyond even her vampiric nature, and she had learned to use it in combat with devastating efficiency. They were attacked twice in the first week, once by a group of hunters who recognized what Celine was, and once by a vampire who saw her as a territorial threat. Both times, Marcus witnessed the full extent of what she had become. She was a whirlwind of motion, her torn wings providing bursts of lift and balance, her prosthetic leg delivering kicks that shattered bone, her fangs and claws weapons she wielded with surgical precision. But what struck him most was her restraint. She could have killed every attacker easily, but she didn't. The hunters she incapacitated and let flee. The vampires she fought to submission, then spoke to in their language, negotiating safe passage rather than escalating to lethal force. "You're trying to be better than what you are," Marcus observed one night as they camped in an abandoned church. "I'm trying to be what I would have been if you had stayed. The woman I was becoming before everything went wrong. She wouldn't have been a killer. She would have found a way to be strong without being cruel. I owe it to her, to who I was, to try to honor that."
As the weeks passed and they gathered the components for the ritual, something else began to grow between them. It wasn't the passionate intensity of their first meeting, that desperate connection forged in crisis. This was something quieter, deeper, a partnership built on honesty and shared purpose. They talked, endlessly. Marcus told her about the 15 years she had missed, about the hunts he had led, the people he had saved, but also about the emptiness he had felt, the relationships that had never worked because he was already bound to someone else in ways he couldn't explain. She told him about her transformation, about the long years of learning to be a vampire, about the small kindnesses she had witnessed that kept her from losing hope in the world entirely. She told him about the night she had saved a child from a burning building, using her speed and strength to reach places no human could, and how the child's grateful tears had reminded her that even monsters could choose to be heroes. He told her about the time he had spared a young werewolf who had been recently turned, against his guild's orders, because he saw in the creature's eyes the same desperate plea for a chance that he had once given Celine. They discovered that they had both been trying to atone for the same sin, the breaking of their bond, in different ways. She by being the protector she wished someone had been for her. He by saving others in the hope that enough good deeds might balance the scale of his greatest failure. "We've been carrying the same guilt," Marcus said one evening as they watched the sunset from a cliff top, "punishing ourselves for one mistake." "Your mistake," Celine corrected, but there was no heat in it. "Our mistake," Marcus insisted. "You're right that I'm the one who left, but you've spent 15 years believing that you didn't deserve to be fought for, that somehow my leaving was proof of your unworthiness. That's the lie I need you to stop believing. You were worth staying for. You are worth staying for. My failure to see that doesn't change your value." Celine turned to look at him, and in the dying light, her crimson eyes seemed almost human. "When did you become wise?" "Around the same time I became too old to afford being a fool," Marcus replied with a slight smile.
The night of the ritual came exactly 6 weeks after their reunion, under a new moon in a forest glade that Celine had discovered years ago. It was a place of old power, where the veil between worlds grew thin, where magic responded more readily to intention and will. They had prepared meticulously, gathering components that were even more rare than those required for the first ritual. This time they needed not just moonflower and dove's heart, but raven's tears, harvested from a bird mourning its mate, phoenix ash, representing rebirth, and a sliver of moonstone that had been submerged in the tears of someone who had experienced both perfect joy and perfect sorrow. That last component had been provided by Celine herself. She had held the stone and remembered the joy of their first bonding and the sorrow of his leaving, and her tears, tinged pink with the blood that now ran in her veins, had been enough to sanctify the stone. The ritual circle was more complex this time, incorporating elements that would account for Celine's vampiric nature, creating a bridge between human and inhuman, living and undead. Marcus had studied the texts obsessively, refusing to rely on anyone else's interpretation, needing to understand every aspect of what they were attempting. As midnight approached, they stood facing each other in the center of the circle. Celine had removed her armor, standing before him in simple clothing that revealed the scars of her transformation, the tracery on her skin where her bones had broken and healed, the junction where her prosthetic leg interfaced with her body, the small marks on her neck where she had once, in desperation, tried to end her own existence. Marcus had stripped to the waist, revealing his own scars, the accumulated marks of 15 years hunting monsters, each one a story, a battle survived. They were both damaged, both marked by their choices and their suffering, but both still standing. "Are you ready?" Celine asked, and he heard the tremor in her voice, the fear that this might fail, that the bond might be too broken to repair. "I've been ready for 15 years. I just didn't know it until now."
Celine began the incantation, her voice steady and clear, speaking words that reshaped reality with their utterance.
Marcus joined in where the ritual required, his voice harmonizing with hers, and he felt the magic building around them, thick and potent. The bond between them, that damaged, scarred connection, began to resonate, to vibrate like a string being tuned. It hurt. Gods, it hurt. Like every moment of separation being experienced simultaneously, like ripping open a wound that had never properly healed. But beneath the pain was something else: recognition, joy, homecoming. The components burned in their silver basin, releasing smoke that smelled of hope and regret intermingled. The circle blazed with light visible only to magical sight, creating a sanctuary separate from the world, a space where two souls could touch without interference from mundane concerns. When the ritual reached its crescendo, when the power demanded its price, they came together as they had 15 years ago. But this time, there was no fear, no doubt, only commitment, only choice, only love that had survived everything the world had thrown at it. Marcus felt the bond snap into place with a force that drove him to his knees. It was nothing like the tentative connection of their first attempt. This was absolute, total, a fusion of souls that left no room for separation. He felt Celine's presence in his mind, in his heart, in the very essence of what he was. Her hunger, yes, but also her strength. Her pain, but also her hope. Her darkness, but also the light she had fought so hard to maintain. And she felt him, his guilt transmuted to determination, his fear become courage, his love that had never diminished despite distance and time. They knelt together in the center of the circle as the magic settled, neither fully human nor fully vampire, but something new, a hybrid of natures, balanced and whole in a way neither had been alone. "I feel you," Celine whispered, her forehead pressed to his. "Completely. It's like being blind and suddenly seeing." "I know," Marcus said, because he did know. The bond let him experience what she experienced, let him understand in a way words never could. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. Never again."
The ritual complete, they lay together in the grass of the glade as dawn approached. A dawn that Celine would need to shelter from, but that no longer held quite as much terror as it once had. Through the bond, Marcus's humanity blunted the worst of her vampiric weaknesses. She could withstand brief exposure to sunlight now without burning, could consume some human food without becoming ill, could even, with concentration, make her heart beat in a rhythm that approximated life. And Marcus felt the world with new intensity. His senses were heightened, not to vampiric levels, but beyond human normal. He could see better in darkness, could hear the approach of danger, could sense the presence of magical beings. The bond had changed him, granted him gifts that would make him a better hunter or a better protector, which was what he chose to be. "What do we do now?" Selena asked as the sky began to lighten in the east. "We live," Marcus said simply. "We find a place to call home. Even if we can't stay there forever, we help people. We fight the darkness. We exist together instead of separately. We build the life we should have had 15 years ago." "It won't be easy," Celine warned. "People won't understand. Your guild can adjust or I can leave them," Marcus interrupted. "My priority isn't their approval. It's you, us, the bond we've forged and the life we're going to build from it." Celine smiled, and it was the first genuine, unguarded smile he had seen from her since their reunion. "You know, I came to find you thinking I wanted answers, thinking I wanted revenge or closure or some kind of ending. But this," she gestured to the bond, to them, to the dawn they were facing together. "This is better than any ending I imagined. This is a beginning." "Then let's begin," Marcus said, helping her to her feet as the first rays of sunlight touched the edge of the sky. "Together, the way we always should have."
They left the glade as the sun rose, Celine with her hood drawn against the light, Marcus walking beside her with his hand in hers. The biomechanical leg, its runes now pulsing in sync with the rhythm of their shared bond, carried her forward with steady purpose. Her wings, torn but functional, folded against her back like a promise of flight. They would face challenges, certainly. The world was not kind to things it didn't understand, and a human bonded to a vampire would be seen as betrayal by some, abomination by others. But they had already survived the worst thing that could happen to them: separation,
loss, the breaking of a bond that should have been eternal. Everything else they could face together. Marcus Thorne, the hunter who had spent 15 years running from his greatest mistake, had finally stopped running. Celine Bloodmorrow, the vampire who had spent those same years learning to be more than her curse, had found the one person who could see her not as a monster, but as a woman worthy of love and commitment. The bond between them hummed with contentment, with purpose, with the promise of years to come. Not an easy life, but a shared one. Not without pain, but with the strength to endure it. Not perfect, but genuine. As they walked into the sunrise, which no longer held the same terror it once had, they carried with them the understanding that love, real love, wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It was about standing beside someone when staying was difficult, about choosing them again and again, about forging connections strong enough to survive even death itself. Celine had asked Marcus if he remembered her, if he remembered the disabled vampire girl he had mated with and abandoned. He remembered. And this time, he would make sure that memory became a foundation for something beautiful rather than a monument to regret. Together, they walked toward a future neither could have imagined, but both had earned through suffering, through growth, through the simple act of refusing to let their bond or their love die despite every reason it should have. The blood moon had set, the sun was rising, and for the first time in 15 years, both of them felt like they were finally, truly alive.
The house stood on the edge of a small village in the Windermere Valley, far enough from major cities to avoid scrutiny, but close enough to civilization to be useful. It was modest by the standards of the old Bloodmorrow estate, 2 stories, stone construction, with a reinforced basement for Celine's use during the day, and a workshop where Marcus continued his craft, now focused on creating weapons and wards to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The villagers knew them as the strange couple from the edge of town, the pale woman who only appeared at night, always kind but somehow unsettling, and the gray-haired man who had once been a hunter of some renown, but who now spent his time helping rather than killing. They were the people you went to when your child was sick with something doctors couldn't cure, when strange sounds came from the forest at night, when you needed help that existed outside the normal channels of authority. They asked no payment except what people could spare, and they turned no one away. On this particular evening, as the sun set and the bond between them pulsed with the contentment of another day survived together, Celine emerged from the basement workshop where she had been crafting a new prosthetic limb for a veteran who had lost his leg in a war that seemed to consume young men without end.
Marcus was in the kitchen, preparing a meal, meat for himself, blood wine for her, a vampire concoction that satisfied her hunger without requiring fresh victims, and fresh bread that she could now, through the bond's magic, actually taste and enjoy in small quantities. "The prosthetic is finished," she announced, setting the limb on the table with pride. It was beautiful work, incorporating the techniques she had learned, creating her own leg, but refined, improved, made suitable for a human who didn't have magic to power it. "Jacob can pick it up tomorrow." "He'll be grateful," Marcus said, stirring the pot on the stove. "That war injury has kept him from his farm for 2 years. Then it's 2 years too long," Celine said, moving to stand beside him, resting her head on his shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortable, familiar. "Everyone deserves a chance to return to the life they want." "Speaking from experience?" Marcus asked with a slight smile. "Always," she replied. Through the window they could see the first stars emerging in the twilight sky, and in the distance the mountains stood like ancient sentinels. The world was still dark, still dangerous, still full of monsters both human and otherwise. But here, in this small house on the edge of a quiet village, 2 people who had been broken had found a way to be whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but together. And sometimes that was enough.
In the end, the greatest curse was not the transformation that made Celine a vampire, nor the bond that tied 2 souls across the boundaries of life and death. The greatest curse was time wasted, years spent apart that could have been spent together.
And the greatest magic was not in the rituals or the ancient incantations, but in the simple choice to stay, to commit, to love despite every reason not to. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with something more realistic and perhaps more valuable. The promise of tomorrow, faced together, one day at a time, until the last day comes. And when that final day arrives, they will face it as they have faced everything else since that night in the ruined cathedral of Ashenfell. Hand in hand, soul to soul, united by a bond that even death itself would struggle to sever. Because some connections, once forged in truth and restored in love, become eternal.